Happy day, YouTube. My name is John, and this is my channel, The Intermancer. In my last episode, I got to the point where I had implemented the experiment life cycle, but I thought I'd be working towards the experiment coordinator on this episode. However, I realized that there were two things that I needed to change on the experiment life cycle. Specifically, the experiment is about a single experiment. Choosing two parents, generating children, scoring the children, maintaining the repository. There were two things about that should be outside of the experiment life cycle that I'd implemented inside. I guess one and a half things. Seeding the repositories, and then both seeding them with organisms and then using those base organisms to randomly generate a set of organisms. So what I am going to do this episode is I am going to remove the seed part out of experiment, and we'll move that into experiment coordinator. And inside of the seeder, I am going to add something that will fill up the repository with a bunch of random organisms based on the original seed organisms. So let's start doing that, and we should start by going to the context document. So Java, experimentation.md. So let's see here. Where does it talk about seed? Seeder. Okay, so we have basic seeder here. And then what I need to do is I need to change this to experimentation. Okay. Coordination. An experiment is a cycle of seeding is composed of seeding a repository with scored organisms and then running a number of experiment life cycles. Okay, so now then, so let's move this section to here. and move everything in one. Move this up. Okay, I want to move the cedar up a level. Classes and interfaces to support seating. Okay. Too many. 5. All right, we'll turn this into just bolded. Let me double check the syntax for that. Text. I think it's just a star on both sides. 2 stars. Okay. Experiment life cycle gets 3. Don't need that text. Okay. Scored organism and scored organism repository are going to move up a level. And interfaces spaces for the experiment coordination. Okay, just moving everything in. Seating. This should not be on its own line. Seaters. Provide initial scored organisms for the overall experiment. So I'm thinking overall experiment, and then there's the experiment. I've been calling it life cycle, but I think it's just cycle. Scored organism repository. Evaluates them. All right. Now, so let's change that to because life cycle, you think I'm narrowing in on my terminology, refining my terminology. The experiment needs to be everything from seeding to the end of the experiment, with where a certain number of cycles have been run. So the life cycle would be all of that. So I don't want to call the experiment life cycle the part that just pulls out parents and does the breeding part, because so we'll call that experiment cycle. Okay. Experiment controller. Well, obviously I was mid-sentence here when I stopped working on this. So, endpoints. So we'll say experiment coordinator. Discord organism repository. I think organism repository is effectively being deprecated. There's no reason for me to... eventually, when I have a distributed system, we'll probably bring back this scored organism, the organism repository. And it's not like I'm deprecating it, like making it go away. I'm just recognizing that it's not one of my... that it's not going to be primary. When we're talking about an experiment, we care about how the organisms are scored. Okay. Okay, so I've done some work here. Now I'm going to turn to the AI and get it to fill out some of this. I have updated experimentation.md to move to change experiment life cycle to experiment cycle and pull Cedar up a level. I also need to add the description for an experiment coordinator that one seeds the scored organism repository, and 2 runs a number of experiment cycles. We will also need to add an experiment configuration class that has the number of cycles to be run. Rewrite experimentation.md to include this. Use existing text wherever appropriate. Okay. Appropriate. So I'm going to use the AI to work on my context document. I've done this before, so that's not really new. Okay, so I did most of what we're talking about. What we need to add is I want the experiment coordinator to separate the seed and the cycles part. So experiment, evaluation, server details. Okay, so it reordered things, but it did it based on the activities, which makes sense, but I like to have it in dependency order. So the most basic elements up top. So scored organism before scored organism, repository, evaluator, before basic evaluator, and all of those things before the experiment cycle, which uses all of those things. So okay. Break up the experiment coordinator dot run experiment method into, you know what, it doesn't need to do that. We can have that. Reorder the element, the descriptions, so that all dependencies are described. Dependencies are described first. Do I need to do that? I don't think I need to do that. Let's just apply. Okay. Analyze the code. And determine what changes need to be made based on the updated context file. Okay. Okay. So one thing to be noted here is the description is saying that the seeder just seeds the organism, doesn't evaluate them. But we needed to evaluate, I've decided. But not doing any selection and repo maintenance. So I'm going to have, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the basic seeder that has a certain number of predefined organisms that it will score and put into the repository, and then a randomizing seeder that will basically do the whole experiment cycle without, you know what? No, never mind. What we're going to do is we're going to just update the seeder, the basic seeder, so that it does the evaluation. We do want it to do the evaluation. But then on the repo maintenance section of the experiment cycle, we're going to specify that if the repo is not at capacity, then it'll just add the children back in without doing all of that comparison stuff. Okay. Update experimentation.md to include, to specify that a seeder will evaluate the organisms that it generates. Also, update the organism also update the organism repository maintenance section so that it specifies scored organism repository and that the default algorithm will not compare will simply add the children to the repo until the scored organism repository is at capacity. Add repo capacity to the experiment configuration class. Okay. So I'm focusing here on the context till it has everything that I want it to. Okay. The experiment coordinator will also require an evaluator. Increase the default number of scored organisms in the repo to 200. I'm just pulling that number out of the air. Just don't think 50 is enough. Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. Okay, good. I like the way it said this. Oh wait, no, not that one. This. If the scored organism repository is at capacity, if not, simply adds the children. If at capacity, compares parents and children and replaces parents with better performing children according to the algorithm described above. All right, so let's apply all this. Accept all. Okay, that's about 35 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this here. In the next episode, we are going to reanalyze this experimentation.md file, markdown file, and apply the necessary changes. Thank you for your time.